Hello and welcome. Today, in the latest of my deep dive videos, I'm going to be exploring the influence of Saturn. Saturn has a mighty reputation in astrology, and sometimes quite a fearful one too. Is that justified? Now, Saturn began a retrograde journey on the 4th of June in the sign of Aquarius, and it's going to be retrograde through to the 23rd of October. So what does that mean? I'm going to be looking at the progress of that. What does it mean if you have Saturn retrograde in your natal horoscope? And what's the significance of Saturn being in each individual house sign? So that's something else I'm going to be checking out with you. Now, in its retrograde, Saturn is going to go face to face with the Sun, which is the luminary. It's the being at the heart of all our existences, and that happens in week 3. The Sun in its home zone of Leo opposite Saturn. What's the implications? But then from the 12th of August through to the 1st of December, Saturn and Uranus repeat within 3 degrees, which is a very tight orb of influence, a square which became exact 3 times in 2021, on the 17th of February, the 14th of June and the 24th of December. What does that represent? What does that mean? I'm also going to share with you the exact chart wheel in equal house to try and make it a little clearer of what was going on in terms of the other planetary influences when Saturn began that retrograde on the 4th of June. So what can we expect over the next months in terms of its overall influences? There's a real fascinating square with Mercury, which I think is already being demonstrated by the chaos that we have at British airports. And also we've got industrial action that's taken place. Mercury often influences transport systems. So that's square very limiting potentially. I'm then going to go on and give you an insight for each of the 12 zodiac signs of what you can expect between now and the end of the year as Saturn makes its progress initially in that retrograde through Aquarius, and then once it goes direct on the 23rd of October. I can also share that exit chart wheel when it goes into direct motion, because that actually sees a serious combination between the Sun and Venus in a square with Pluto. So Pluto obviously also a very influential higher octave planet. So please stay with me. This is quite a lot to get through. I wanted to do this video before now, but I've tested positive for COVID for 7 straight days. I felt pretty feeble, but I have felt a bit better today, so I'm just taking it steady. But I obviously wanted to engage on this particular subject because I feel that Saturn is something that can be very misunderstood in astrology, and that's something I really want to bring greater light and clarity, I hope, with you with this presentation. Now, if you really would like to ascend above zodiac astrology and embrace your future prospects in a really meaningful way, if you give me 3 pieces of personal birth data of time, date and place of birth, I can give you a roadmap that will guide you for the rest of your life, plus a 12-month personal forecast, and you can get 30% off. Please see the link beneath this video. I'm also clattering towards that 100,000 K mark in terms of subscribers. If you've already subscribed, I'm so grateful. Thank you. If you've yet to do so, it would be great to have you along. So please click or tap on that bell notification symbol. So Saturn has such a glorious physical presence. Seen through a powerful telescope, those rings radiate out. Amazing. But of course in astrology, it does have quite a challenging persona. Traditionally in Roman mythology, Saturn was known as the god of agriculture, and in the week before the winter solstice, that would be a celebratory period where things could get very lively indeed. There wasn't much restriction going on then, but of course that would be governed by the sign of Sagittarius, which is very much to do with, being very free and enjoying a lively time, a Jupiterian time for sure. But then, of course, when we get the winter solstice, around about the 20th or the 21st of December each year, then that's Capricorn season, and the sign of Capricorn is governed in isolation by Saturn. So Capricorn is the 10th zodiac sign. It's a cardinal sign. It's very much about leadership, but it's about the established order. It's about structures. Physically, it's about our skeleton. It's about our teeth, our knees. But in a more spiritual sense, I think Saturn can represent the leader in a family group. Traditionally, that was said to be the man, but I don't think it needs to be the case now. I think it can be someone who provides a leadership role where clear boundaries are given to people, which actually makes people feel secure. So Saturn helps us to develop a discipline in our lives. If we, get up at a certain time, we achieve certain things with our days, we have a good balance in our approach to situations, it gives us a sense of achievement. So that's very Saturnian. The limiting part of Saturn is where maybe in our personal horoscope when we were born, Saturn is part in a more testing position. So for example, in my natal horoscope, Saturn is conjunct Mars. Now people with that particular aspect are often very good at athletics, and when I was younger that was something that I really, really enjoyed. But Saturn conjunct Mars can also lead to a sense of frustration. You really have to focus on your goal in a very narrow way, because if you spread yourself too thin, then your energy dissipates and it is difficult to keep the traction going. But then you could have Saturn in a really positive angle, say a trine to the Sun. So someone like that would be able to balance their individual drive, the Sun, their inspiration, their creativity, in a way which is outputted in a very stable, reliable and systematic way. So that's where Saturn can be very anchoring in a positive manner. So I don't want you to think that Saturn is all the downside, but generally for all of us at the moment, it is going through the sign of Aquarius. It began that journey on the 22nd of March 2020 through to August the 2nd. It then returned back into the sign of Capricorn and then came back into Aquarius on the 17th of December 2021 and has been in Aquarius ever since. Aquarius is the sign of the collective, and what's happened during this transit is that COVID has had a more manifest impact on more people. Also, we've got a big reset going on in terms of the financial structure within our lives, whether it's interest rates, the cost of energy, the cost of petroleum, and even foodstuffs are becoming much more expensive. And part of the reason for that is the North Node moved into the sign of Taurus on the 18th of January, joining up with Uranus. And the Uranus square that's going to be repeated from the 12th of August through to the 1st of December this year, I think it is going to see a tightening of the screw when it comes to costs. And I do personally believe, not because I'm suffering myself at the moment, that COVID is likely to find ways to just sort of leak out into society much more. Even though it appears it's being pushed back, I do think we've got another wave of it to come, and I think that particular aspect will have something to do with it. But of course, Saturn in the sign of Aquarius can also make us much more aware of how we're connected to one another. So that could work in a very positive way. Saturn doesn't shine in the sign of Cancer. Here it is debilitated. It's also in its fall in the sign of Aries, because if you think about Aries, the ruler's Mars, so Mars is about action, Saturn restricts that action. The sign of Cancer is governed by the moon, so Saturn on the moon is a cold energy, a detached energy. It's not so hot there for sure, but it is exalted in the sign of Libra, so the detachment of Libra works well. Venus and Saturn, you wouldn't think the Venus rulership of Libra, that would be something that particularly would be a good thing. But Saturn likes the detachment, the objectivity of the air sign of Libra. Now, if you have Saturn in a natal horoscope that's opposite the Sun, the person could be, say it was on the 2nd or 8th house cusps, that person could be very cautious with their resources. They could be someone who may be very good at building things and micromanage things very astutely, but it might make them seem a little bit mean. You could have Saturn in an opposition with Jupiter, and it would actually be a good relationship in a natal horoscope because the risk-taking energy of Jupiter is balanced by the more considered energy of Saturn. So Saturn can work in so many different ways with other planets, but if it is in a more debilitated sense, linking with the Moon or Mercury, that can point towards people who may have low spirits, perhaps suffer a little bit with emotional challenges. And of course Saturn, if it's in the 12th house, would be a much more different influence than Saturn, say, in the 1st or the 7th. Saturn in the 7th means someone would take relationships very seriously. Saturn in the 12th could be someone who needs quite a lot of time detached from others, but could feel isolated and alone. Saturn in the 1st may be someone who has health issues, but when they're really applied to something that really engages them, could stick at it for the longer term. Saturn in the 2nd house may be someone who does find finance a little bit harder to come to them. So there's lots of different ways that Saturn will work. Now, I mentioned to you that I was going to share with you the event chart for when Saturn went into the retrograde. So I'm showing that on the screen now, and the standout influence is that Saturn is in a square with Mercury. And in this event chart, based on Universal Central Time and Greenwich, so other astrologers could come up with a different ascendant. We can see the ascendant is the business-like Capricorn, which of course is ironic. That is the sign that's governed by Saturn. But you can also see that Saturn, in its other home zone of Aquarius, is in the 2nd house, money. And yet Mercury, the planet of thought and talk and exchange of information, that's in the 5th house of risk. But Saturn is squaring Mercury almost exactly. So I would say during the period of this retrograde, if you're somebody who is thinking about something that's much more speculative, it's absolutely vital that you really analyse any information before you make a binding decision. The great news, if you do need to delve into something with great precision, is that you can see that Mercury is actually forging a beautiful trine with Pluto, and that's one of the most analytical of all the planetary influences you can get. So that's a good counterpoint to the potential limitation on risk that Saturn and Mercury are forging. But Mercury, it also has a lot to do with travel and distribution. And in the United Kingdom, ever since this retrograde began on the 4th of June, we've had an industrial dispute that's being played out on the railway and tube system. But also there's been chaos at airports because they're saying that, you know, there's not enough staff to handle all the baggage due to the amount of people who are off with COVID. I think also there's probably some labour shortages which are impacting on the situation as well. So if we're wanting to see some improvements in the travel sector, I think they could be a long time coming. So that's something we need to expect as well. Now, I've already mentioned that I feel that the financial reset that I believe is coming is going to be quite a big one. And when Mars moves into the sign of Gemini, Well, it's going to be for 7 long months, and that's going to be at the start of the 3rd week of August. That is going to see us finding new ideas, new ways of thinking, and maybe even new ways of travelling, particularly if we can rely much more on cycling, running, walking, being much more physically active to deal with some of these transport glitches that I do feel are going to potentially be ongoing. So that just gives you a flavour of what we can expect over the months of this retrograde. I think there is going to be more squeezing going on in terms of budgets, finances. I think the stock market is, in terms of equities, could be reset. I also feel in terms of the rise in property prices, which has been so prevalent in recent years the world over, that's also going to trim back quite significantly. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a major crash, but a reset. I feel that that is very much on the astral cards. Now, Uranus turns retrograde on the 24th of August. Now, I've already mentioned to you that Uranus and Saturn are the co-regents of the sign of Aquarius. Uranus is very much about the innovation, the restlessness, the truth, the higher truth. Saturn much more about, respecting traditions and well-established themes, because they have actually worked well for a long time. Don't necessarily try to mend something that isn't broken. That old maxim is something that we could think of in terms of Saturn in Aquarius. But the retrograde in the sign of Saturn is bringing it back towards Uranus, but then Uranus begins its own retrograde on the 4th of August. But from the 13th of August to the 1st of December, within those crucial 3 degrees, we've got tension, because one influence is about maintaining the status quo, Saturn, and one is about breaking free. Also, the sign of Taurus is the Earth, and it's also critically territory if we think of physical Earth. And the struggle that's been going on in Ukraine is the bad side of Saturn, if you like, the bad side of Pluto in Capricorn, of wanting to use power and basically military might in order to dominate, because that suits a particular political agenda. It's not because it's a just campaign, it's because people want to achieve something for their own purposes. And I think essentially that situation is going to reach a really potentially unpleasant point, but we mustn't underestimate the resources that Saturn gives us as well, to keep going when we're tired, to keep chipping away patiently. Patience and the passage of time do more than strength or fury. So that's Jean de La Fontaine, French philosopher, very much in keeping with the energies of Saturn in a positive way. Also, people will say things like, oh, if you've got Saturn on the 7th house cusp, say in your moving horoscope, Saturn goes over your 7th house cusp, well, that would be a time when a relationship could break down. And it is true that can happen, but equally it could be when we weld ourselves to a cause, a business partnership, or a personal relationship that actually we really are taking seriously, and will therefore have the adhesive to last for the longer term. It's not a black and white analysis that we can take of Saturn, to be perfectly honest. Now, the other thing I wanted to tell you about Saturn was that in Greek mythology, Saturn was called Cronus. And if you think of the word chronological or chronology, or in terms of our watches, they're all governed by Saturn. So Saturn is essentially the measurement of time. And in terms of our life periods, what we go through, you can pretty well divvy things up into about 1 3/4 years, 3.5 years, 7, 14, 21, 28. Why is that when Saturn's cycle takes nearly up to about 30.5 years to complete? Well, the answer is, if we take the lunar cycle in progressed astrology, and we take the cycle of Saturn in terms of its transits, the midpoint between the two pretty well divvies up in that way. So a year and 3/4, 3.5 years, 7, 14, 21, 28. And you will find that time, this chronology of our lives, plays out quite metronomically in keeping with those timings. So we're often leave a job, the 7-year itch. You know, we've been in a job, given it everything, then we become bored and we need to leave. Could be a relationship, because obviously Saturn, as it moves round, is forging a relationship with our natal Saturn. So at 7 years of age, it's squaring the place where Saturn was when we were born. At 14, it's opposite, or just over 14. And if we take into account the midpoint between the progressed moon and Saturn, that's where we get that measurement of time. So many people leave big situations at 21 years, 28 years. It's just absolutely unbelievable. So if you always remember the word chronos, chronology, that's very much in keeping with what Saturn represents. It helps us to work in a structured, disciplined, efficient way where we want to apply ourselves and submit to its demand that we're very dedicated. But if we want the rewards without putting that perspiration and application in, that's when Saturn can punish us. And also Saturn, say for example it was in an opposition with Pluto, the moving Saturn in the sky is in opposition with Pluto, that can see things that have been hidden suddenly come into the open. Or it could be that structures that have gone on for some time can be challenged by the power of Pluto and break down. So some things can come to an end. So astrology is lots of different wheels of different influence having an impact on our situations at any given time. So I mentioned at the outset, what does it mean if you have Saturn retrograde in your natal horoscope? Well, it depends in what sign it's in. It also depends in what house it's in, and it also depends in what relationship it's forging to any other important point, like an angle, an ascendant, midheaven, or so on. So Prince Harry has Saturn on the midheaven, and ever since he was young, he's found it really, really difficult to, press the palm, press the flesh, if you like, shaking people's hands, because he's somebody that wants a much freer and more adventurous lifestyle, which was why he made a success of being in the army, likes riding polo horses because it's very physical, and the limitations of that job where you're always in the public gaze, Saturn on the 10th house, how we link with the world at large, that's been very difficult for him. So that's an example of how Saturn can work. So if Saturn is retrograde when we're born, the welter of responsibility that Saturn can bring can be higher, but it does depend on exactly where it is and where it's reacting with other influences. Now this Saturn retrograde, I think, is a time for us all to think very carefully about what being a human being is about. The reset that's coming is going to see possibly a 4-day week for many people very soon. Lots of people are working from home now. Automation has become a massive part of many people's situations, or certainly artificial intelligence or robotics. All these things are going to have a very Aquarian influence on our existence, but not necessarily all for the best, in my humble opinion, but in a more positive way. If some of those things do free up more space to think about the things that we can enjoy that have some kind of benefit for others, like community integration or work or support, being mindful of the needs of people around us, that's a much less goal-orientated lifestyle than Saturn in the sign of Capricorn, which is very much about the material and the physical world. So Saturn in Aquarius in retrograde, I think, is asking us to think very much about our philosophies, but also about our longer term future, because the sign of Aquarius is about planning for that. It can be about our friendships, it can be about our networks. So those are the areas that could come under pressure, particularly in week 3 when the Sun goes opposite Saturn. But I think the square with Uranus is really essentially going to be about COVID and money. And that's going to become really much sharper, the impact of that, from the 13th of August to the 1st of December. Now, if you would kindly stay with me, I'm going to run through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces. You can listen to these in terms of your ascendant or your sun. The choice is yours. So, Aries, for you, having Aquarius in the sign of friendship, may have probably seen a few people make way over the last year or so. Not necessarily in an easy way either. There may have been some people that you had quite a lot of personal investment in, people that you valued, but there could have been some tightening up there. You've become much more, I think, probably selective about who you would work hard at with in terms of your relationships. So there may have been a case of a few less faces around, but perhaps the people that are left are the people that are really meaningful, and that process is likely to continue for you. Now, because Uranus is obviously in your second solar house, like us all, you're needing to think of your income, your expenditure, how you can perhaps become more efficient in these areas. And Uranus is asking you in its square with Saturn to be more thrifty in some ways, but be more imaginative. And that's something that you can enjoy. But I think Saturn in the 11th house just means that I'm not saying that you should let your pragmatism pulverize your idealism, but I think you have to be very realistic about what's possible. So, in terms of planning your future, if something does seem a little bit left field, you may have to rein that in a little bit and focus on earning money in a way that works for you, perhaps more in the shorter term, but have another plan that's coexisting with that, which does work for you in terms of your longer term expectations of a more idealistic type. So juggling the two areas, I think, is going to be very important through to the end of this year. Now, Taurus, obviously Saturn for you is in the sector of work, goals, ambitions, authority. So very Capricornian, really. So its retrograde could see you thinking a lot about where you work, how you work there, and whom with. But Uranus in your sign continues to push you to try to find the most authentic version of yourself possible. Now, I'm not saying that you've been faking it till now. It's just that we can all get caught up in doing what we think we should be doing. But Uranus doesn't really like all that. It's much more concerned with getting in touch with what you really feel is right for you, the individual. But that means sometimes being much more daring or pushing back on other people's expectations. So the expectations that come through Saturn could be your parents, it could be your partner, it could be society's expectations, it could be some energy that's been put into your own personal conditioning way back that you should behave or do things in a particular way. But if you're in an environment, particularly professionally, which you really find throttling and limiting, and it doesn't give you much personal satisfaction, I think the pressure is really going to increase from now to the end of the year. And what you're being asked to do really is to get totally in touch with what you need to do for you. And of course that could mean letting go of a little bit of short-term stability and security, which is very counterintuitive for the average Tauran. So that's your challenge for the rest of this year, I feel. Now, Gemini, Uranus continues in your 12th house, and that's been causing a lot of implications for your nervous system, which has been on edge, for integrating the more spiritual and emotional dimension. But Saturn's in your 9th house. Have you got something to say that's important? Is it something you need to say that's very much to do with your past experiences, your spiritual or psychological insights? If you're a healer or a life coach or a trainer or a poet or a musician, or you have knowledge about higher education, or you want to teach people or signpost them in a way which can be really helpful to them, then Saturn's retrograde is asking you to dig right deep down into yourself and really get every piece of information that you can offer out there, and that can actually be very good for your soul. But will it be a stressless process? I suspect not, particularly because when Saturn retrograde began, it was squaring with your ruler. So I think the delicacy of the situation for Geminis is that Gemini is it's a mutable sign, but it's also, one of my best friends is a Gemini, and we were having a discussion the other night when I was asking her a question, and it was rather like talking to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who also a Gemini, in that you get 5 different answers that are not to do with the original question whatsoever, obfuscation to the nth degree, but brilliantly mercurial, funny, and avoiding. So that's the problem with Uranus and the North Node in the 12th house for you guys, Gemini. They are pushing you not to avoid some deeper realities which may suit your buzz, quick, funny way of being, and that's pushing back on you. And so therefore Saturn in the 9th house could be that someone's going to press you about issues of truth and probity. Well, in terms of the British Prime Minister, it's about time, isn't it? So the 9th house is the higher truth. So I wouldn't be taking shortcuts, with whatever you're dealing with in your life. You need to be as honest and upfront and straightforward as possible. But obviously the 9th house can be about longer distance travel. It can also be about contractual issues, agreements, publishing. So those areas could be a little bit problematic, but equally they could be areas of great positivity if you dive deep and into the depth of your own inner wonderment, which is often fantastic with Geminis, and just getting out there in a way which is formatted and relatable to others, and you can go from strength to strength. Now Cancer, for you obviously Saturn is in the 8th house. The 8th house is shared resources, can be to do with intimacy, sex, can be to do with property, investments, pensions, legacies, insurance payouts, all those kind of things. Saturn retrograde during this next few months through to the 23rd of October is probably going to see you working on those areas, but the outcome can be positive. It's just that Uranus is in a very idealistic area, so don't be too idealistic about money. This is not the best of times to go into business with a friend, to be honest. That old maxim of business and pleasure not mixing is probably one that you should be mindful of. But Saturn in the 8th house could make you much more conscious if you are in a relationship where the level of closeness has become like a frozen conflict. You may not even be talking about it because Saturn can be so cool with your other half, but you're both going through some kind of mechanizations of connection still, but maybe not really. If that kind of rings a bell to you, I think Uranus is kind of saying you need to be more truthful about where your future lies. So Leo, obviously you know that in week 3 of July, the Sun in your sign does go face to face with Saturn. That could be a key time for relationship matters. One can get stronger, someone could come into your world who could hang around for some while, or it could be a really testing point. It just depends on your unique situation. But Saturn in retrograde in your 7th house is going to teach you more and more about not necessarily just what you need in relationships, but what other people need from you. And also that as a Leo, the really important part of your nature is yourself. This is not me being unkind, because Leo people can be the kindest of all the zodiac signs, particularly to good causes. But Leos need to feed their desire to be respected at the least, liked, preferable, adored, absolutely the best. And Saturn in your 7th house suggests that over the last year and a half, you may have been getting a bit of a crash course in who doesn't like you very much. But equally, you could have forged a much more sincere and deeper relationship in that time, which is delighting you. So again, don't necessarily look at Saturn either in its normal progress or retrograde in a one-dimensional way. But the tension could be with someone in a professional situation because of Uranus being in your 10th house. So politics at work, or about the type of job you do, could be something you need to engage with over the next few months. Virgo. Now, Saturn for you in the 6th house is asking you to think about your welfare. Now, your sign is the sign of purity, so it's about health, fitness, diet, discrimination, sifting through the available options to get the option that is optimal. A lot of people who would work in, say, as pharmacists or natural medicine practitioners will have strong 6th house or Virgo charts, because it's about the physical purity that your sign can attain. So Saturn in the 6th house is almost like pushing you to make the most of your natural ability. But if you're not looking after yourself, you're not getting enough nutrients, you might be eating enough bulk, you might be getting some goodies, but are you a bit sluggish? Is it a time to take your physical exercise a bit more seriously? Have you got your life, on the other hand, so sterilely worked out that it's become really, really dull? Because of your desire to have order, have you squeezed out all risk? So what Uranus is asking you to do is counter your need for stability and structure with a bit of excitement and spontaneity. So those two edgy influences are going to be going on through the Saturn retrograde, but particularly with the square with Uranus. Libra. So Libra for you, obviously Saturn being in your 5th house, traditionally if someone has Saturn in the 5th house in their natal horoscope, it's suggested that they may not get married, or that if they do get married it will be late, or they may not necessarily have children, or if they do have children it may be late. You know, Saturn in the 5th house isn't known for being a bag of laughs. So what Saturn's asking you to do during its transit through the sign of Aquarius is make the most of your talents, creativity and flair, and work hard at them, because I've got a Libra ascendant, and let's be honest about it, we can be a little bit lazy. So if you've got a talent, Saturn retrograde in the 5th is saying work at it. If you've got a relationship, work at it. You know, if you've got your children, you may adore them, but is there something that you could do a bit more to stimulate them? Now, in terms of Uranus, of course, the 8th house can be about ends and beginnings. Can also be about passion. So again, it's a bit like Virgo for you. If you feel your love life or your creative world is rather samey, are you really pushing yourself outside your comfort zone? Are you wanting everything to have that sort of pleasantness that you don't really want to rock the boat or speak your truth? So you're being asked, speak your truth. People often ask, why has Vladimir Putin, as a Libran, causing all this chaos? Its ascendant is Scorpio and his midpoint is Leo, his need for attention, and that midpoint is conjunct his 10th house. So his 10th house is in Leo, and the 10th house is how he connects with the world at large, and his Venus squares up that midpoint. His Venus is in Scorpio, deep feelings, but he has Saturn and Neptune in the 12th house. That's the plotting and intrigue, and obviously other things that go on. So if you've often thought, why is that terrible man thrown in with us lot? Well, it is just his Sun and his Mercury actually that are in Libra. So he's got other influences. Just thought I'd give you that little bit of an insight. I will do a special on Vlad the Lad soon. So that brings us to Scorpio. So for you, Saturn retreating in your 4th house, are you going to find the home you really need over the next 4.5-5 months? It's possible with Saturn retrograde, but equally if you're feeling really cramped in your environment, that's going to become more manifestly clear too. Now Uranus, of course, is in your 7th house of relating. The tension between your emotional life and your need for freedom and excitement in your partnerships that's really what you're going to have to deal with. So if you're finding an existing relationship a bit dull, that may push you, that combination, to make a change. But if you do, you can give up some of the stability that may be part of what you need. Quite a tricky one for you, Scorpio, which brings us to Sagittarius. Well, for you, it's about tension, unfortunately, physical or nervous tension. You could be on the edge of your seat through to the 1st of December, and so it's important to get plenty of rest, sleep well, go to bed early a few nights, do some gentle stretching and exercises. Make sure that you're not overloading yourself with unnecessary stress, which I know isn't easy. But if you've got ideas that you want to share, Saturn in the 3rd house in retrograde is asking you to embrace them. But there could be tensions with people immediately around you, neighbours, your community. Particularly little things could get on your nerves, which wouldn't ordinarily perhaps be the case. Which brings us to Capricorn. Of course, Saturn is your ruler. 2nd house retrograde, all day long. It's about money. It's about the economy, stupid. And of course, it's in a square with Uranus from the 12th of August to the 1st of December in your sector of risk. And when this event starts, Mercury is also in a square. So I'm not saying that the average Capricornian goes around scattering their resources very easily, because you're actually very shrewd and very astute, and you know how to scrutinize situations to get the best amount of information before you make binding decisions. But this chart is a bit risk averse even for you. But then it could be more about sugars, diet, how much excess you may be carrying. If you're feeling uncomfortable in yourself, I think it would be a good time to take your diet a lot more seriously, to be honest. So if you're someone who really likes to kick back and be a bit of a rebel, get together with your friends and really enjoy a good time, nothing wrong with that at all. But if it's become so regular and maybe you're going beyond what's safely wise for you to consume, maybe that's the area to look at. I've got a very Capricornian chart, to be honest, so that's for me as well. Which brings us to Aquarius. Now, of course, Saturn retreating in the 1st house can lead to lower physical vitality. The 4th house, where Uranus is your modern ruler, is about where you live. Having space, freedom, quiet, peace, comfort, air around you where you live is nothing new for the average Aquarian, is it? So you've just been reminded of all your needs in a much sharper, more intense, more immediate way from now through to the early part of December. Which brings us to Pisces. Unfortunately for you, Pisces, Saturn retrograde is in your 12th house of psychology. That's a tough one. And Uranus is in your 3rd house of your nervous system. So worry, stress and anxiety are things that you need to be conscious can play a part. You know, you might be someone who's very evolved and has got all these things really worked out, but sometimes it can come from things we can't control. So for example, Uranus in the 3rd house can be technology. If you work with technology, that could be an area that is quite demanding for you over these next few months. But Saturn in the 12th house also offers a supreme opportunity to really get to know who you truly are. Deep down, look at that shadow side, embrace it, look it in the eyes, even the bits you really don't like. Because if you do, you're freeing yourself up for when next May Saturn enters your sign and you're going to start a brand new period. You're really bringing to an end a period at the moment for the next about 10 months. This is a wind down period of clearing up lots of old issues and really positioning yourself to start afresh in a new, wonderful and magical way. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for sticking with me when I'm not quite as energized as normal. Take care and goodbye for now.